Good evening, everybody. Welcome back to the Albright. I think we'll kick off at 5 o'clock. We've got people on Zoom. I'm Jamie Fraser. I'm the director here at the Albright. It's so lovely to see you here. You're always very welcome. Before I introduce tonight's lecturer, Roy, I just want to make a couple of very brief announcements. The first one concerns our Centennial Campaign. Hopefully you've all heard of the Centennial Campaign. If you haven't, it means we're not doing our job. The Centennial Campaign marks 100 years of the Albright being in this building next year in 2025. And what we're trying to do is build up our endowment so that we are secure for the next 100 years, so we can continue doing what we do, which is provide a place for scholars from across the world to pursue research excellence. And if you want to engage with the Centennial Campaign, you can always come and speak to me or go up to our webpage and you'll see the various channels. And I say that as I come into just one very quick slide. When I've been introducing some of these lectures over the last year, I've been mentioning some of our past donors over the last sort of 100 years, really. But I want to mention one donor in particular today. Oh, thanks, Emily. That's Carolyn Strange. You may have heard that Carolyn passed away on December the 30th last week. Carolyn was the single biggest donor to our Centennial Campaign, and she and her late husband, James F. Strange, were very familiar faces in the Albright for many, many years when they would bring in excavation teams and even their own young family when they were digging in places like Sepphoris. Carolyn, I met Carolyn once when I was at the last ASOR meeting in Chicago and found her to be just the most delightful, lovely, supportive, intelligent, curious, imaginative lady. And I will be sorry that we won't see her at the next ASOR meeting, and we'll be sorry that we won't see her again here at the Albright. And our thoughts with her family, particularly James, who sits on our Albright board. The campaign for the Centennial Campaign is so successful in part due to Carolyn's generosity, and we've set up as part of the Centennial Campaign actually a naming fund in honour of Carolyn and James F. Strange. And if you want to support that, then again, there is a channel on the website which is fairly easy to find, or come and speak to me and Michael. But on to what we're here for today. It's my pleasure to introduce Roy Merom. Roy is the Ernst Freiks Annual Professor here at the Albright and a Polonsky Postdoctoral Fellow at the Van Leer Jerusalem Institute. Roy is a social historian and historical geographer. He completed his PhD at the University of Haifa's Department of Middle Eastern Studies. He previously served as a Fulbright Postdoctoral Fellow at the University of California, Berkeley, and as a Dan David Fellow at Tel Aviv University. Roy's current research focuses on the history of rural Palestine during the Mamluk, Ottoman and British Mandate periods. His scholarship moves away from the well-studied cities and towns towards the countryside, home to the majority of the population. He has led interdisciplinary collaborations with other archaeologists and scholars and has curated, or continues to curate, the Palestinian Rural History Project for over a decade, which documents oral histories and information about 800 Palestinian communities. His broader academic work concerns Palestine's historical geography from the Umayyad to the British Mandate periods, and he's here to speak to us tonight. Please welcome Roy Merom.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I hope that you hear me, and many, many thanks for coming and attending this lecture under not the most pleasant of times, admittedly. Archaeological explorations of late Ottoman, that is Mameluk to British Mandate rural sites in Palestine, Israel, have focused on the material culture and the evidence provided by external observers, ignoring the perspectives offered by local inhabitants. My key take note, I have this small keynote sign about to stress what I think is important, is as follows. When delving into the historical fabric of evidence, one could not ignore the rich answers offered by modern narrations and contemporary documents with respect to the ancient past. Although separated by time and space, these documents can be read as part of the same longue durée that has formed the basis for the historical consciousness of Palestine's inhabitants since Mamluk times. And let's do a small discourse with some of these sources. When Salah ad-Din liberated Palestine, narrated one elder, from the Crusades in 1187, he began to divide the lands that the Crusaders took over from their original owners, and gave every village the land opposite it along the sea. Jews took the same latitude in the forest of Assur, in the west, etc. And now one chronicle, Mamluk chronicle by Makrizi reads, Sultan Baybars ordered that the land of Caesarea to be surveyed and its revenues be assessed. He suggested that the emirs and the mujahideen would be allotted land from the country which God had given unto him. The emir Saifuddin Kalaun, the later Mamluk Sultan, received half of Taibat al-Ism, modern Taiba in the triangle area of Israel, as his allotment. Our land, narrated one elder in Taiba, reached as far as 7 waves in the sea. Needless to say that this situation didn't exist for centuries. At least, and I really doubted it until I found the following document that reads from 1276. The triumphant king and sultan, Kalaun al-Salhi, endowed as waqf a third of the village of Taibat al-Ism and its revenues. Its borders go westward towards the salty sea, and then continues south along the seashore towards Mafjar al-Bulakia and towards Birkat al-Hamam. Now, 700 or 800 years later, another elder narrated, in Blakia, east of Gash, and in Birkat Lehme, my grandfather used to shelter his herds for the winter. We receive news that people from among the land-tilling tenants of Bani Saab are plotting to flee their places of residence. If this report is true, said the governor of Egyptian-ruled Nablus in the 1830s, then every landowner and owner of property who intends to flee from his village to another settlement must be captured and be sent to us immediately. All the villages came together because of war, by residents fleeing civil strife, blood feuds, and taxes. Another elder narrated. What I wanted to tell you with this discourse of disparate sources from many different ages and many different places narrating the same area south of Netanya is that Palestinian ethnography is a window into earlier periods and complex processes, otherwise unrecorded in the sources. We need to know when looking at Palestine or the Levant or Bilad al-Sham that it was an open space with intra, and extra-regional migrations. As much as people came to Palestine from Egypt, from the Hijaz, from the Yemen, from Syria and Iraq, so did many left and settled in Egypt, in the Hijaz, in Yemen, and during the 19th century also across the sea in the Americas, forming new diasporas of people who would in the future call themselves Palestinians. Another point I want to make is that pre-1948 Palestine was a settled land, originally widely spaced rural settlements, but with extensive distribution of nomads and semi-nomads. Patch cultivation, but all the land was in use as grazing, grazing land, woodland, or agriculture. The towns formed the religious centers and international trade in citrus fruit, olive oil, cotton, olive soap, watermelons, and with considerable autochthonous populations, but it was, as I said, an open space with incoming and outgoing population movements. It was a multi-ethnic, multi-religious, multilingual land with an imperial superstructure provided by Ottoman and British authorities, with local and regional identities, and with communal autonomy. Why choose rural Palestine? It is just a headache, you know, look at this. Don't even try and memorize it because there isn't a key next to it. Rural Palestine during the late Ottoman period, starting let's say in the middle of the 18th century, offers us a sea of bewilderment and complexity with its littoral and hinterland, plains and highlands, core of settlement and marginal settlement peripheries, settled land and unsettled land, cities, towns, villages. It had its urban residents, its villagers, its nomads. It experienced internal growth and transnational migration. the population as today suffered from taxation, but also indulged in tenurials and were affected by land regimes. There was this tension between empire and populace, and all in the same time with global economic integration, the rise of national identities, and what is commonly called in Middle Eastern studies colloquial as the age of isms, imperialism, colonialism, capitalism, modernism, and what all of this does to the countryside. This is one of the things I wanted to ask today, and perhaps offer one or two answers. And of course, transnational migration to and fro, Muslims, Christians, Jews, the Ottoman Empire as an empire of refugees, and the formation, as I said, of international diasporas. It was also the age of locality in which regional and village and clan levels were affected by broad transformative processes affecting Eurasia and beyond. Some sources for the study of rural Palestine might include the staples of the craft written in archaic scripts, in difficult-to-read ledgers of Sharia courts, of land registers, administrative petitions, and official decrees preserved in Istanbul, diplomatic correspondence, newspapers, and travelers' accounts available on archive.com, material culture and architectural relics available in the field, oral history, and ethnographic research also available on YouTube and in villages and in libraries, in excavation materials. And please do come, there is place. And this brings me to my baby. 10 years ago, I initiated the Palestinian Rural History Project out of a sense of urgency at the expected, the inevitable, but the irreversible loss of culturally and scientifically important information that deals with the Palestinian countryside, names of people who lived, voices, experiences, local traditions. And over the time, what began as a small project centered around Taibe and around Natani, where I lived in my earlier years, expanded over time to cover the whole of Palestine and started to spill over into the Transjordania with the Jawlan, and even now, more recently, Jordan. This archive contains many recollections of life, of over a century of life under Ottoman, British, Israeli, Jordanian, and Syrian rule, and also a lot of information to deal with law, agriculture, toponymy, and topography, and nature, and whatever that has to deal with the countryside. It doesn't mean that I don't do with cities, but not as much. And of course, the way to create and record this knowledge is through fieldwork, with engaging with narrators of days past, going out even in times when it might have looked dangerous, and it might be dangerous, and documenting this for posterity. And actually, usually begin with my PhD, but later it really took on a life of its own. And today I want to offer you a prism of how to look at a countryside, be it in the Ottoman period or in earlier stages, because a lot of the things that I will say today are also applicable for previous periods, if and when the sources are available at our disposal. And that is my main premise, is to offer to analyze rural settlement and countryside through three levels of complementary and contradictory perspectives, that offered by the region, the village, and the clan. And we are going to take these three steps together today, and we try to follow along with some small notions or small takeaways that can benefit your and other people's research. Let us begin with the level of the region, which is the most trivial one perhaps because it is the most heavily dealt with in historical geography. But I will say that historical geographers don't do their work well because they look at villages or settlement or sites as point particles in space without considering their internal and external complexity to their fullest. And just as a picture, to consider if this is a picture of inhabited sites and it shows us the Ekomane, this is another way to perceive the same space as constructed from different territories or fiscal units with defined borders that changed through time, but those that dictated a lot of land use and through the ages. So this is the importance, that one point that I want to make is the importance of spatial division for historical analysis. Or to put it more clearly, is this not an axiom, but a conclusion that every parcel of land in the Levant, and I guess that's also beyond, is positioned within a spatial administrative hierarchy that dictates the administrative and judicial authority, and also its subordination and the involvement of local power actors in taxation and settlement. And if we take, for example, this Ottoman sketch map of the Bani Sab district, which is, broadly speaking, the Sharon area of modern central Israel, with its a joint area on the east of the western part of Jabal Nablus, the Samaria. So we have on the top tier of level, we have the Wilaya, which is the province. Under it, we have the Liwa or Sanjak, which is the district, Kada sub-district, Nahia village cluster, Karye or Mazra, it's either a fiscal unit that is inhabited or uninhabited. And then at the bottom of this, we have the Mauke, which is the specific locale. So as I said, every parcel of land is positioned within this spatial administrative areas, and I brought a document from my own collection to show this. So if we have this Ottoman land registration deed, dated 1313 of the Hijri of Hano Hijrea, which means roughly 1900, or no, even 1886. So we'll have the Vilayet of Beirut, the Liva of Iker, the Kaza of Haifa, the Nahia of Haifa, the Karye, the village of Kufr Kara, and the name of the place, El Shawahid. Now, where the heck is that? So we have British era maps that show it clearly just west of modern Kafr Kara, at the entrance to the Iron Valley, Iron Pass, that leads to Armageddon, to Megiddo. But you can also see it today as a partially agricultural land, and it has this water reservoir. And again, it had all of this subordination that is connected with it. Now, every land is associated also with rights of ownership, possession, and use, what is commonly called in the scholarship as tenurials. So land or site's position affects the rights and use over time. Systems of land use, of land ownership, possession as use, three different categories, reflect the changing realities of settlement and desertion. They are connected with specific populations. So one, let's say, territory might involve the nomads that take protection money from villagers, for, let's say, and they have their own way of carving out territory for protection fees. But the local falachin within a village will have their own spatial delimitations where everybody has a right to graze or to plow or do whatever is connected with this. And those developments place limitations on later waves of settlement. So for example, there was a forest that was used for pasturage and for cutting down felling wood. Then after the felling of the forest, it will be turned into either a wasteland because of deforestation, or into agricultural land that is fitting for cultivation. In the case of the area that I worked on, the Sharon, open for the cultivation of citrus fruit groves. And as I said, it led to changes in the physical environment that restricted or facilitated future patterns of human activity, and toponymy, legal documents, and cadastral maps offer evidence of earlier stages in the process. And we saw that with the document that Baibar's Kite-Bai endowment record that shows that indeed, centuries ago, 700 years ago, the lands of Etaiba and many, many other villages did reach the sea, and it's not only an urban legend that was perpetuated in local law. Let's have a look at the village level. Has anybody here has a clan name or was born in a Palestinian village? My grandparents, but not me. Okay, so village structure. Let's have a look. This is a map of a town in the southern part of Palestine between Majd al-Asqalan, modern Ashkelon, and Ashdod, which is the town of Hamama. Here you can see a small example on the top of these households, dwellings surrounding a central courtyard, the house, a type of building. So if in the Iron Age we have the four spaces, how it's called? The four 4-room buildings. So in the Ottoman and late Islamic periods, the common house type is this one, the khosh. But although it might look like very disorganized, actually the villages have a sort of, let's say, plan, although it is quite rudimentary, but you can see that the areas outside of the village has threshing floors. It is made of residential quarters. There is usually a mosque and several holy places called makamat or shrines. There is a village well and square. And during the British Mandate period, the expansion of the urban fabric or the build-up space as a result of a demographic increase has led to the creation of new neighborhoods outside the old village nucleus. And this also holds true for cities like Jerusalem, because we are in the area of Musrara, to the north of us, Wadi Joz, and all of these areas started developing with the improved security that was provided with the Tanzimat regime in the 19th century of the Ottoman Empire. Now, another point that I would like to make is that sites shouldn't be analyzed only solely as the site itself, but also we have to take into account the territory or the land of that site. So if, for example, we have here the site of Ermeli, Bir Ermeli, and Ein Shams, better known to you as Bet Shemesh, the biblical Bet Shemesh, but over time the name changed, with Bet being displaced by En, and Shams returning into an Arab village with a Sheikh Ali tomb for one Abu Meizar, which is no else than the change or corruptions of Ebenezer, the biblical story that was superimposed there by the Crusaders. But using documents, although this village has been abandoned for at least 200 years, we have been able to, me and my colleagues from the Israeli Center for Archaeology have been able, Boaz and others, have been able to reconstruct the boundaries of the said village, and you can see how it was used. They had the orchards, vine fields, and agricultural land associated with several springs and wells in the area. After the village was depopulated or destroyed because of internal strife, in the turn of the 19th century, these lands were taken over by another village called Deraban, which also, in its name, commemorates the tradition of Ebenezer, of Eben Haezer, which is mentioned in connection with the standing stone at Bet Shemesh. So here is like a reconstruction that we did. Now, as terms of population and demography, you know, it's very easy for archaeologists to come up with assessments of population size and deal with, try to calculate the size of the population by in relation to the built-up area, and actually it doesn't work that well, because the only period we do have in time that is well documented is the 16th and 19th centuries, where the size of the population is given by male, tax-paying male heads of families called Haneh, households, and we don't know what was the size of the family. It's usually calculated between 4 or 5, but we can take the number of stated households per village and try to tabulate it and see how many was most common. So you can see that 90% of all villages had between 10 to 30 households each. So it will be around the average size of a settlement during the late 19th century was somewhere between 60 to 200 people. And we can see that the top, like this is the top 10th percentile of places that have 200 households at 1870 will make it a town, in fact, because only very, very small number, or less than 40 sites out of 1,200 had this sort of population. But by the British Mandate period, that was considered a medium to small size village, 800 residents, let's see. Not long ago, a few months ago, there passed away one of the greatest historical geographers of the Arab countryside, a scholar by the name of David Grossman, not the author, not the famous author, but a a historical geographer, which I had the pleasure of meeting when I was 13 or 14 years old, and then I asked him questions that continued to bother me for the next 20 years or so. But he said something that I also would like to bring forward and present to you, which is this following saying, that it's not only about physical geography that dictates the sites of residence, it's not only about springs and good topography and arable soil and water, but also there is an importance of understanding the human element in the settlement processes. The questions that arise are many, he said. Who were the settlers? Where did they come from? What reasons for their being cut off from their hometown? And I would like to say that these questions are of prime importance for any archaeologists working on late Islamic sites. But the answers are more often not available in the archaeological record. There is very, very, very few destruction layers in, let's say, late Islamic contexts. I think I can think of 3, but there were hundreds of villages which were destroyed in ritualized combat conducted between different clans, the Qais and Yaman feuds. And the sad thing is that because they are not within the archaeological record, they are thus beyond the reach of archaeologists and excavators alone. Take, for example, this ruin above Kalkilia called Beit Jifa, not the toilet stuff, called Beit Jifa. And I would like to speak with you for a few minutes about tracing lost villages and missing villagers. And this was actually on my first excursion to the West Bank. It was in, I think, August 2017. And I would like to look at a village called Jindas. Jindas is a settlement next to the entrance of modern Lida, inhabited since at least the Byzantine period, intermittently into the Crusader period, and then again in the Mamluk. It is documented in written sources since 1461 and upwards to 1890 when it was finally abandoned. And what I wanted to show you here is trying to, first of all, understand the structure of the village. And what makes this site very interesting and important is that the village still exists. You can see the buildings are still there. They weren't demolished by the IDF in 1948 because the site wasn't inhabited. So you can compare it with German aerial photography from the 1917, and you can see all of these buildings still exist in the soil. The huge tree, the Christ Joshua, the cedar tree, the seasonal pond that the people excavated in order to create mud bricks and water their cattle. The Zawiya, this is the mosque with its 2 mihrabs or prayer niches and a huge antiquities looting hole, like 5 meters deep, that basically exposed something like 12 limestone floors, each above the other. So it shows you how long this building was in use. And unfortunately, this building continues to fall apart. As you can see, this is in recent collapse. But there is also a reservoir, which is much later. It's built of cement, but there is no known pool. But there must have been one, because in the 19th century, this place is mentioned as a sort of a bayara, which will come back to it later. And you can see also the cactus edges. And this is one example of this landscape archaeology, what it can teach us about land use through time. Let's take another example. This is another Bavarian aerial photography of the ruins of Ein Shams. There is a Mamluk village and an Ottoman village below all of this. And when I got this image, I sat down and drew up the buildings as they appeared with their low raising walls of this izbe, temporary habitat that was formed by residents of the neighboring village, Deir Abban. So here we have we have like quarters, and we have roads between them, and we have a sacred place. And it was so beautiful until we came and superimposed it with the archaeological excavations and found out that this is a totally different village built by the people of Deir Abban on top of the abandoned Ein Shams. So here you have 2 different villages whose floor plan can be reconstructed by 2 different populations at 2 different times as a result of historical events that we can actually trace around. So if we look again for the questions, okay, the village has been abandoned, where are its residents, if we take Joshua's account, they were all massacred, right? But the book of Joshua's account, but actually no, they continued to migrate in the countryside. So if Jindas was abandoned at least twice, so in the first wave of depopulation, residents reached as far as Kifel Hares, the so perpetuated burial place of Joshua, Binun, identified with Tamnat Hares by the Samaritans and after that the Jews, but also in other villages closer like Liban and Derbalut, this by Egyptian migrants from Gaza, and this by earlier populations. Another example, rural diasporas of disloyed villages. So it looks like an IDF bombing rate, right? So going up to Latakia in the north, but no, it's actually basically the people of En Shams spread over mostly in the areas surrounding the central part of the southern Levant, and especially in Isdud and Edaria. Their clan name is Ibn el-Hawarin. In the Sharia court documents from the 16th century, we have Ibn Harun as the family name. So even that is preserved. And again, you can see the dynamics of people coming and going. And this, I just want to make a short claim that I can't substantiate here. But it just, I think, in my opinion, puts DNA studies on a futile ground. If each village is inhabited by people coming from, let's say, 20 different countries, and each village, some of them even 100 different places of reported places of origins, how representative is one sample, or even 10 or 100 for the composition of the population? You know that today, the Palestinian, let's say, genomic repertoire is basically mostly J1M726, which is a Levantine lineage that developed, haplogroup, developed in the Levant and Anatolia in the Natufian period, then migrated to Yemen, then came back. But so do most of the Canaanite material. So people will come and go, and this isn't reflected in the genomic pool. If people would not, will have relations out of wedlock, so also will the haploid group change, although the people will be considered part of the same social figuration that existed for centuries. And this has been shown with the regard to the Ashraf, to the so-called descendants of the Prophet Muhammad, who have a huge diversity of haplogroups. How about disloyed villages? Another rocket coming from the wrong direction. This is Kufar Kara. A whole village with its name and population moved 82 kilometers from around Kalkilia to its modern location at the entrance of Wadi Ara. Again, a question of how do you consider this? As an archaeologist, is it a new village or is it a continuation? Because in the end, people moved and took the name with them, We have several of these in Israel, Palestine, we have Masmia, and we have this one. And it's just interesting in my opinion. Anyway, it's like an Easter egg. Let's have a look at the last level of analysis, that of the clan, the family. I think that I won't be mistaken in saying that Palestine, the Levant, or the Middle East in general is a segmentary society. Who knows what segmentary structure theory? Can somebody save me this explanation and just explain this, please? How about you, Michael? No, I'm just kidding. Segmentary society is a society that is based on lineages and clans and patriarchal family order, a kinship with its different components. It was the tribal society of the Israelites at the biblical age. Was and still is prevalent in many tribal societies in Southeast Asia, in Africa, in South America, but not in Europe. Is there any European here who has a clan other than some Scottish people for fun? For fun. But yeah, but for them it's like serious stuff. Look at this. This is one section, one small section from a 12-meter long volume scroll that documents the perputed origins of a lineage in one village in Palestine. And it says such and such and such, that is a divine, has a divine spark in him, died and passed and and was buried in the village of Sidon, Seda in Nablus, and then his sons were also buried there, and then their grandsons established like 4 different villages. And again, it was important for them to write this on a vellum or parchment, excuse me, made from gazelle skin as a sort of shufuni anas. But that, for us, it's a waste of money, but for them, it was very important as part of their own prestige and perpetuating their local, let's say, status. How are households structured? What is the basic structure of these lineage groups? So the basic component is that which is called in Arabic the nasab, the lineage, which is basically father, sons, uncles, and grandsons. And then this is expanded, as Levi Strauss has greatly shown a century ago, by marital alliances. You can tie together different lineages in alliance. We know this from the War of the Roses and also from the Game of Thrones, but it also holds true for rural Palestine. And this, let's say, family businesses with the lineage and their associates is amplified by partnerships with equally powerful or the same status families, and in the end also by patronage, which is a very important component of segmentary societies. That is, for example, if I'm a sheikh, I will have my loyal people I will employ, and in time of need I could call upon them. And this is one example of this. So in the late 19th century, there began to develop a new class of landed families, merchant elites, and trade networks in the Levant. And it brings me to a very difficult question I will pose to you in colloquial Arabic, hopefully that anybody will be able to answer. What is this? Eshhar? Bordoan, Bordogan, but what does it say? It's an orange, isn't it? But it's called after Portugal, right? And it was invented in Jaffa, I think in the 18th century. It's indeed a Palestinian icon, the Jaffa orange, isn't it? When was it developed from the hushchash or the bitter lemon? Or it's not really clear, but by Napoleon's campaign, there existed dozens of what's called the bayara or well house complexes all around Jaffa. How do we know this? Because we have field plans that it made with these rural buildings with their associated water containers. The bayara is, again, as we said, an icon of Palestinian rural landscapes. The citrus fruit plantation. Why I think this is important, again, because it is a reflection of these developments that we saw. This is one bayara, perhaps one of the earliest north of Jaffa. It's called Bayarat Hanun, and it's situated near modern Netanya Stadium. So you can watch a game and travel within an archaeological site within 2 minutes. But again, an orchard is much more than a diesel engine, a well house, and fruit. So what made the Bayara tick? You know, this was the main economic engine for the Palestinian countryside and also its urban fabrics along the coastal littoral for nearly a century, you know. This was the big money of the time. It wasn't high-tech. It was orange fruit, citrus fruit that were used to treat the lack of vitamin C, which is called scurvy in English. You see, so here we cooperate for the best. So what made the Bayara tick? So what I did in one of my studies is to spatially analyze business ledgers by Bayara owners. So here we have names of different peoples from different tribes. For example, there is Hussein al-Harbawi. We know this family as a family from Khaled, the neighboring village, today in central Netanya. And this is the days they worked in the month, and this is how much they were owned. And we had this, and then we had this. So we did a spatial analysis of the business ledger to see who worked. And we also did an architectural survey and noticed several different types of residences there were adobe constructions all around, which doesn't appear in this architectural survey provided courtesy of Avi Sasson. But there were also one floor high buildings for workers, but there was also a luxury castle or a luxury apartment on top, which we later, after addressing some sources, we learned that it was actually built for a refugee, an escapee officer from the Turkish Ottoman army during the First World War, and who was the brother of Yusuf Haikal, the last mayor of Jaffa, built by the Hanun family from Tulkarem. That's why it was called Hanun, Bayarat Hanun. And so we have three things. We spatially analyze business ledgers, do architectural surveys, and interpret them by oral recollections. And all of this allows us to reconstruct the Bayara's socio-economic structure. So it's much, much more than masonry or technology or agriculture or capitalism. I won't get into that too much, but you can see how the family lineage, the family resident, he has foremen, people of trust, and all of these sharecroppers, side labor, people during the fruit season will come with women, children, and all people to help gather the fruit and wrap it up and transport it and market it. And in the end, it developed into a new village called Rabet Kufr Sur, in a place that a century ago was basically a woodland, very sparsely used woodland. And again, not only the Bayar socioeconomic side, but also its associated social networks of power, patronage, and trade. So in the case of this family, we went to its home village of Safarin and saw how it had connections with the neighboring villages. It had land. It moved to the rising and developing provincial center, district town of Tulkarem. Then they intermarried with people in Jaffa to export the fruit, and they built the Bayarat Hanun within their territory, their estate. It was a 2,000 hectare estate, if not more. And you can see that their alliances and their rivals. So it's a very dynamic social fabric that archaeologists usually don't give account of or don't put enough attention for, as much as historians don't give enough credit for the archaeological material culture contributions to understanding history and also to the physical, spatial layout of sites and places and people who lived and worked like us in generations past. While the material cultural analysis of the remains attests to hidden global networks of trade. I need to be very careful in the way that I operate this. Let's see. So first of all, we have workers from Egypt coming like the Exodus. Then we have wood coming from Anatolia to construct the roof. And then they started exporting. Then they built the water, it's called an Antillean ware, how it's called, a Persian water wheel. And then they started exporting in the beginning watermelons to the Ottoman Empire. This was the small money. Then they discovered that they can use Marseille roof tiles as ballast when coming back. So this in 1860 started filling up the countryside, even in the most remotest of villages. Do we have this? And also timber from Europe is much cheaper than those imported from Anatolian forests. So here we have these two products coming from France. And later, the UK is in the picture and bringing, how do you call this? Diesel engines, and then occupied the Levant. And during this time, they started importing iron railings in order not only to build railroads, but also to construct roofs. And then started importing cement in 1915 for the first time. And then there came the revenge, which was exporting Cyprus fruits for exorbitant prices. So it was in the end a very difficult thing. I don't want to get too much into that, but just to show you also how oral narratives look like when transcribed. So Qassem, son of Ibrahim, had land. which he had later taken over by his children. It stretched from such place to such place. The names of its plots were such and such and such and such and such, and it had all kinds of things. So we could, a decade ago, sit with people born in the 1920s and actually know the names of all of the different buildings, all of the different parcels of land, and see that this was used to grow banana, which is also a very high demand in the time. This was for lemons, and this was for field crops. And here were some of the tenants, and here were some of the Egyptian dwellings. And again, it's a very, very complex thing. I can suggest some further reading if you'd like to have a look at that more narrowly. These are some of my works, all available open access through eScholarship. And now I can offer you two choices: either ask questions or go to the reception and desserts.